It was October 17th, 1975, and the Las Vegas Hilton was buzzing with the kind of electricity that only an Elvis Presley concert could generate. 15,000 fans had packed into the showroom, dressed in their finest clothes, clutching their tickets like precious treasures, all of them counting down the minutes until the king of rock and roll would take the stage and transport them to another world with his legendary voice and magnetic presence. The energy was palpable.
I don't know. You don't know what.
And everyone in that room believed they knew exactly what they were about to experience. They had seen Elvis before, or at least they had heard the stories, and they thought they understood what an Elvis Presley concert was all about. But none of them, not a single soul in that massive crowd, could have predicted what was about to happen that night. None of them could have known that a 10-year-old boy who had never heard music in his entire life was about to teach the greatest entertainer in the world something profound about the true power of song. Backstage, in the carefully controlled chaos that always preceded an Elvis performance, the usual rituals were taking place. Roadies were making final adjustments to equipment, backup singers were warming up their voices in quiet corners, and members of Elvis's inner circle were attending to the countless details that went into putting on a show of this magnitude. Elvis himself was in his dressing room, going through his own pre-show routine, mentally preparing himself to give another performance that would leave his audience breathless and hungry for more. He had done this thousands of times before, and yet he still felt that familiar flutter of nervous energy in his stomach. That excitement that reminded him why he had fallen in love with performing in the first place. No matter how many shows he did, no matter how many standing ovations he received, Elvis never lost that feeling of genuine anticipation before walking onto a stage. But on this particular night, there was something different happening in the hallways behind the showroom. A small group of people had gathered near one of the side entrances, and there was a commotion that was unusual even for the typically hectic backstage environment of an Elvis concert. Joe Esposito, Elvis's trusted road manager and one of his closest friends, was speaking with a woman who appeared to be in her mid-30s, and beside her stood a young boy who couldn't have been more than 10 years old. The boy was thin and small for his age, with sandy brown hair that fell across his forehead and large, watchful eyes that seemed to take in everything around him with intense concentration. He wasn't making a sound, wasn't fidgeting or bouncing with excitement like most children would be in such a thrilling situation. He was simply standing there, completely still, holding something in his hands that he kept looking down at with an expression of nervous determination. Joe Esposito had been with Elvis for years, and he had seen just about everything there was to see in the world of rock and roll. He had dealt with overzealous fans, pushy reporters, demanding venue managers, and every other challenge that came with managing the career of the most famous entertainer on the planet. But something about this particular situation made him pause, made him pay closer attention than he might have otherwise. The woman who introduced herself as Margaret Chen was explaining something to him with tears streaming down her face, and Joe found himself genuinely moved by what she was telling him. The boy's name was Michael Chen, and he had been completely deaf since birth.
I don't know.
He had never heard
You don't know what.
voice, never heard the sound of birds singing in the morning, never heard thunder rolling across the sky during a summer storm. And he had certainly never heard music, not a single chord, not a single melody, not a single note of any song ever recorded. The world of sound that most people took completely for granted was something that existed for Michael only as an abstract concept, something he knew about intellectually but could never experience directly. He lived in a world of perfect silence, communicating through sign language and lip reading, understanding conversations by watching their faces rather than hearing the words they spoke. But here was the remarkable thing, the detail that made Joe Esposito stop what he was doing and really listen to what Margaret Chen was telling him. Despite never having heard a single note of Elvis Presley's music, Michael was absolutely devoted to the king of rock and roll. He had become fascinated with Elvis after seeing him perform on a television broadcast when he was 7 years old. Of course, Michael couldn't hear the singing, couldn't appreciate the powerful vocals or the driving rhythms that made Elvis's music so electrifying. But he could see Elvis. He could watch the way Elvis moved across the stage, the way his body seemed to become one with the music, the way his face expressed every emotion of every song, and most importantly, Michael could read Elvis's lips. For 3 years, Michael Chen had been teaching himself to lip-read Elvis Presley's songs. He would sit in front of the television for hours, watching recorded performances over and over again, studying the shape of Elvis's mouth as he formed each word, memorizing the lyrics by watching rather than listening. It was painstaking work, incredibly difficult for a young boy, but Michael was determined. He felt a connection to Elvis that he couldn't fully explain, a sense that this man on the screen understood something about reaching people that went beyond just sound. And over time, Michael had learned to lip-read every single word of more than 50 Elvis songs. He knew when the choruses were coming by watching Elvis's breathing patterns. He knew when the emotional peaks would hit by watching the intensity build in Elvis's expression. He had essentially learned to experience music through his eyes rather than his ears, and Elvis Presley had been his teacher without ever knowing it. Margaret Chen had saved for 2 years to bring Michael to Las Vegas to see Elvis perform live. She had worked double shifts at the hospital where she was employed as a nurse, had skipped vacations and birthday presents for herself, had done everything she could to make enough money to give her son this one experience. She knew how much Elvis meant to Michael, knew that seeing the King perform in person would be a dream come true for her deaf son, who had never let his disability stop him from finding joy in the world around him. And when she had finally saved enough money, when she had finally purchased those precious tickets,
I don't
she
know.
had also done something
You
else.
don't know what.
She had written a letter to Elvis's management, explaining Michael's story and asking if there was any way, any possibility at all, that her son might be able to meet his hero backstage before the show. To her amazement, the request had been granted. Someone in Elvis's organization had read her letter and had been touched by Michael's story, and arrangements had been made for the Chen family to come backstage before the performance. And now here they were, standing in the hallway behind the Las Vegas Hilton showroom, waiting to meet the man whose silent image brought so much joy into Michael's soundless world. Joe Esposito excused himself and walked quickly to Elvis's dressing room. He knocked twice, their usual signal, and entered to find Elvis adjusting his famous white jumpsuit in front of the mirror. Elvis looked up, immediately noticing the unusual expression on his friend's face. "Joe, what's going on?" Elvis asked, his voice carrying that familiar deep warmth that made everyone feel like they were talking to an old friend rather than a global superstar. "You look like you've seen a ghost, man." Joe took a deep breath and told Elvis about Michael Chen. He explained about the boy's deafness, about his devotion to Elvis, despite never having heard a single song, about the years he had spent learning to lip-read Elvis's performances. He told Elvis about the letter that Margaret had written, about the sacrifices she had made to bring her son to Las Vegas, about the small boy waiting nervously in the hallway with something clutched in his hands. Elvis listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious with each passing moment. When Joe finished speaking, Elvis was quiet for a long time, staring at his own reflection in the mirror, but clearly seeing something else entirely. Finally, he spoke, and his voice was thick with emotion. "Bring them in, Joe. Bring them in right now." When Margaret and Michael Chen walked into Elvis Presley's dressing room, the contrast between the two figures could not have been more striking. There was Elvis, larger than life in his rhinestone-studded jumpsuit, surrounded by the glamour and excess of rock and roll royalty. And there was Michael, small and thin and silent, dressed in his best Sunday clothes that his mother had carefully pressed that morning, looking up at his hero with eyes that were filled with wonder and disbelief. For a moment, nobody moved, nobody spoke. The silence in that room was absolute. Then Elvis did something that surprised everyone, including Joe Esposito, who thought he had seen everything his famous friend was capable of. Elvis walked over to Michael, knelt down so that he was at eye level with the boy, and began to speak very slowly and very clearly, making sure that his lips were perfectly visible. "Hello, Michael. My name is Elvis. I am very happy to meet you." Michael's eyes went wide. He understood.
I
He
don't
could
know.
read Elvis's lips
You
just
don't
like
know
he
what.
could read them on television, and suddenly this moment that had seemed like a dream was absolutely, undeniably real. The king of rock and roll was kneeling in front of him, speaking to him, looking directly into his eyes. Michael's hands began to move, forming the signs of American Sign Language. His mother watched, ready to translate, but before she could speak, Michael reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. His hands were shaking as he held it out toward Elvis. It was the thing he had been clutching in the hallway, the thing he had been looking at with such nervous determination, a letter. Michael Chen had written a letter to Elvis Presley. Elvis took the envelope gently, as if it were something infinitely precious. He looked at Michael, then at Margaret, silently asking permission to open it. Margaret nodded, her eyes already filling with tears, because she knew what the letter said. She had helped Michael write it, translating his signs into words on paper, and she knew that what her son had written would touch anyone who read it. Elvis opened the envelope and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. The letter was written in careful, childish handwriting, each letter formed with obvious effort and concentration. And this is what it said. "Dear Elvis, my name is Michael and I am 10 years old. I have been deaf since I was born. I have never heard any sound in my whole life. I have never heard my mom say I love you. I have never heard birds or rain or thunder, and I have never heard your songs. But I know every word you sing. I watch your lips on the TV, and I learned all your songs. And when I watch you sing, I feel the music even though I cannot hear it. I feel it in my heart. You are my favorite person in the world. I know you probably sing for people who can hear you, but I want you to know that you also sing for me. You sing for a deaf boy who will never hear your voice, but who loves you anyway. I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for making me feel like music is for everyone, even for someone like me. Your friend, Michael Chen. Elvis Presley had performed for presidents. He had sung for millions of people around the world. He had received standing ovations that lasted for 10 minutes, and fan mail that arrived by the truckload. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had ever affected him the way this simple letter from a deaf 10-year-old boy affected him in that moment. Elvis's hands began to shake, his eyes filled with tears, and for one of the very few times in his adult life, the king of rock and roll completely broke down and cried. He didn't try to hide it, he didn't excuse himself or turn away. He simply knelt there on the floor of his dressing room, tears streaming down his face, holding Michael's letter in his trembling hands. Margaret Chen was crying too, and even Joe Esposito had to wipe his eyes with the back of his hand. The only person in the room who wasn't crying was Michael, who was watching Elvis's face with that intense concentration that had become second nature to him, trying to understand what was happening.
You don't know what.
After a long moment, Elvis carefully folded the letter and placed it in the inside pocket of his jumpsuit, right over his heart. Then he reached out and took Michael's hands in his own, holding them gently but firmly. He looked directly into the boy's eyes and began to speak, slowly and clearly, making sure Michael could read every word. Michael, I want you to listen to me very carefully. What you just gave me is the most precious gift I have ever received in my entire life. You have taught me something tonight that I will never forget. You have shown me that music is not just about sound. It is about connection. It is about feeling. It is about love. And if a boy who has never heard a single note can feel my music in his heart, then maybe I have been doing something right also. Thank you, Michael. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Michael was beaming now, his small face transformed by a smile of pure joy. He understood what Elvis was saying, and he understood that his letter had meant something real to this man he admired so much. But Elvis wasn't finished. He had something else to say, something that would change the course of the entire evening. Michael, I want to ask you something. Would you like to watch my show tonight from a very special place? Would you like to sit right at the front of the stage, so close that you can see my face the whole time I'm singing? And I want to make you a promise. Tonight I am going to sing every song for you. I am going to make sure that you can read every word I sing. Because tonight, Michael, you are going to feel my music like you have never felt it before. Michael looked at his mother, his eyes asking the question that his voice did not. Margaret nodded, tears still streaming down her face. Michael turned back to Elvis and nodded vigorously, his whole body trembling with excitement. What happened over the next 2 hours would become legendary among Elvis fans and would be talked about for decades as one of the most extraordinary performances the King ever gave. Elvis had special seats arranged for Michael and Margaret right at the very front of the stage, so close that Michael could see every detail of Elvis's face, every movement of his lips. And true to his word, Elvis changed the entire way he performed that night. From the very first song, it was clear that something was different. Elvis was still dynamic, still charismatic, still the electrifying performer that his fans had come to see. But there was something else happening, something that the audience couldn't quite explain at first. Elvis was singing slower than usual, enunciating every word with careful precision, and he kept returning to the front of the stage to sing directly to a small boy in the front row who was watching him with absolute, unwavering attention. At first, the audience was confused. Some people whispered to each other, wondering who this child was and why Elvis seemed so focused on him. But as the show went on, something remarkable began to happen. The audience began to notice Michael, began to see the way he was watching Elvis with such intense concentration, began to understand that something special was taking place right before their eyes. Word began to spread through the crowd, passed from person to person in hushed whispers. That boy is deaf. He's never heard music before. Elvis is singing so the boy can read his lips. By the middle of the show, the entire energy of the room had shifted. People weren't just watching Elvis anymore. They were watching the connection between Elvis and this small deaf boy, witnessing a moment of genuine human connection that transcended entertainment, that went beyond the usual excitement of a concert. There were tears in people's eyes. There was a reverence in the air that was unlike anything most of them had ever experienced at a rock and roll show. And then came the moment that would be remembered forever by everyone who was there that night. Elvis walked to the front of the stage and held up his hand for silence. The audience, already captivated by what they had been witnessing, immediately quieted down. Elvis looked out at the 15,000 faces watching him, then looked down at Michael, then back out at the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to tell you about someone very special who is here with us tonight. His name is Michael, and he is 10 years old. Michael was born deaf. He has never heard any music in his entire life. He has never heard my voice or any of the songs I sing. But this young man taught himself to read my lips by watching me on television, and he knows every word to more than 50 of my songs. Tonight, Michael gave me a letter that changed my life, and I want to read part of it to you. Elvis reached into the pocket over his heart and pulled out Michael's letter. The reading was so quiet you could hear people breathing. With his voice shaking with emotion, Elvis read Michael's words aloud to 15,000 people, including the part where Michael wrote that he felt the music in his heart, even though he could not hear it. When Elvis finished reading, the audience sat in stunned silence for a moment. Then, spontaneously, 15,000 people began to applaud. But this wasn't the usual concert applause, the screaming and cheering that typically accompanied an Elvis performance. This was something different, something deeper. It was applause of recognition, of respect, of overwhelming emotion. Many people were openly crying, others were on their feet, not jumping or dancing, but standing in tribute to a small deaf boy who had touched the heart of the king. Elvis waited for the applause to fade, then spoke again. "Michael, would you please come up here on stage with me?" The crowd gasped as Joe Esposito helped Michael climb onto the stage. The little boy looked overwhelmed, standing there in front of 15,000 people, bathed in the bright stage lights. Elvis walked over to him and knelt down again, putting himself at Michael's level. "Michael, I want to sing a song just for you, and I want everyone in this arena to help me. I want them to be completely silent while I sing, so that you can watch my lips and feel the music in your heart, just like you told me in your letter. And then, when the song is over, I want everyone to tell you how beautiful the music was, not with sound, but with light." Elvis stood and addressed the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, when this song is finished, I want everyone to hold up their lighters or their matches, and we are going to show Michael what music looks like. We are going to turn this arena into a sea of stars, so that he can see the feeling that his story has created in all of us tonight." The audience murmured in understanding and anticipation. Elvis walked over to the piano, sat down, and positioned Michael on the bench beside him, where the boy could clearly see his face. Then Elvis began to play the opening chords of Can't Help Falling in Love, his most beloved ballad. What happened next was something that no one who was there would ever forget. Elvis sang the song more beautifully than he had ever sung it before, enunciating every word with crystal clarity so that Michael could read his lips. But he wasn't just singing with his voice, he was singing with his entire body, his entire being, pouring every ounce of emotion he had into the performance. His hands moved gracefully over the piano keys, his face expressed every nuance of the lyrics, and his eyes kept returning to Michael, making sure the boy was following along, making sure he was feeling the music, even though he couldn't hear it. Michael watched with total concentration, his eyes never leaving Elvis's face. And slowly, something miraculous began to happen. Michael's hands started to move in his lap. At first it was barely noticeable. Then his movements became more pronounced. He was signing the words to the song as Elvis sang them, translating the music he was watching into the language of his hands. Elvis noticed. He saw Michael's hands moving, saw the boy signing along with his singing, and something broke open in his heart. Tears began streaming down Elvis's face even as he continued to sing, and his voice somehow grew even more emotional, even more powerful. The entire arena was silent except for Elvis's voice and piano. 15,000 people holding their breath, watching this extraordinary moment unfold. Wise men say only fools worship, but I can't help falling in love with you. When the song ended, Elvis sat for a moment with his hands resting on the piano keys, tears streaming down his face. Then he turned to the audience and nodded. What happened next was one of the most beautiful sights anyone in that arena had ever seen. 15,000 flames appeared in the darkness. Lighters and matches held aloft by people who were crying, who were overwhelmed, who had just witnessed something they knew they would never forget. The arena was transformed into a galaxy of flickering stars, all of them burning for a deaf boy who had never heard music but who had felt it more deeply than most people ever would. Michael looked out at the sea of flames with an expression of absolute wonder. Tears were streaming down his face now, too, and he turned to Elvis with a look of gratitude so profound that it seemed to communicate more than any words ever could. Elvis put his arm around the small boy and pulled him close, and the two of them sat there together at the piano, looking out at the ocean of light that 15,000 strangers had created for a child they had never met. The concert continued after that, but everyone knew they had witnessed the highlight of the evening, perhaps the highlight of their lives. Elvis brought Michael back to his seat eventually, but he continued to sing every song directly to the boy, and the audience continued to participate in this unprecedented event, staying unusually quiet during ballads so that Michael could lip read, then erupting in carefully modulated applause that was respectful of the sacred atmosphere that had been created. After the show, Elvis spent 2 hours with Michael and Margaret in his dressing room. He gave Michael one of his signature scarves, along with a gold necklace that he took off his own neck and placed around the boy. He signed photographs and told stories and listened as Margaret translated Michael's excited silence. But the most important thing Elvis did that night was make Michael a promise. "Michael," Elvis said, speaking slowly and clearly so the boy could read his lips, "from this day forward, every time I perform, I am going to think of you. I am going to remember that music is not just about what we hear, but about what we feel. And I am going to try to sing every song the way I sang for you tonight with all my heart, so that anyone who watches can feel the music when they hear it. A 10-year-old boy who has never heard a note of music taught me what music really means, and I will never forget it." True to his word, Elvis did change after that night. Those who were close to him noticed a difference in his performances, a new emphasis on emotional connection that went beyond mere vocal excellence. He began to spend more time interacting with audience members, especially children, and he made a point of visiting schools for deaf children whenever his tour schedule allowed. He kept Michael's letter with him until the day he died, and it was found among his most treasured possessions at Graceland. As for Michael Chen, that night in Las Vegas changed his life forever. He went on to become an advocate for deaf awareness in the music industry, working to make concerts more accessible to hearing-impaired fans through sign language interpretation and visual elements. He gave countless speeches about his experience with Elvis, always emphasizing the same message that Elvis had understood so intuitively that night. Music is not just about sound. It is about connection, about feeling, about love. Michael eventually wrote a book about his experience, and in it, he included the full text of the letter he had given Elvis that night. The book became a bestseller and raised millions of dollars for deaf children's charities. On the dedication page, Michael wrote simply, "For Elvis, who showed me that music has no barriers, and for my mother, who helped me hear with my heart."
I don't know.
Elvis Presley performed
You
for
don't know
kings
what.
and presidents, for audiences of millions around the world. He recorded songs that would become timeless classics, and he built a legacy that would endure for generations. But when people who were there that night in Las Vegas are asked about their most memorable Elvis experience, they don't talk about the hits. They don't talk about the jumpsuits or the karate moves or the famous curled lip. They talk about a small deaf boy and a letter that made the king cry. They talk about an arena full of flames, burning bright for a child who couldn't hear the music, but who felt it more deeply than anyone. And they talk about the moment when 15,000 people learned something that Michael Chen had always known. That music, real music, the kind that changes lives and touches souls, has nothing to do with sound. It has everything to do with love. The story of Elvis and Michael reminds us that the greatest performances are not always the loudest or the most technically perfect. Sometimes the greatest performances are the quietest ones, the most intimate ones, the ones where an artist strips away all the showmanship and simply connects with another human being in a moment of genuine understanding. Elvis understood this instinctively, and on that night in October of 1975, he proved it to 15,000 witnesses who would carry the memory of that evening with them for the rest of their lives. Today, there is a small plaque backstage at the venue that was once the Las Vegas Hilton International Showroom. It reads, "In memory of the night when music became visible." October 17, 1975, Elvis and Michael. And every year, on the anniversary of that concert, deaf children from around the world gather at Graceland to celebrate the man who showed them that they belong to the world of music just as much as anyone who could hear. Because Elvis didn't just sing for the deaf boy who never heard his voice, he sang with him. And in doing so, he reminded all of us what it truly means to share music with another human being. If this incredible story of connection and understanding moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that thumbs up button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear about the power of reaching out to others in unexpected ways. What moment in your life taught you something profound about human connection? We would love to hear your story in the comments below. And do not forget to ring that notification bell so you never miss another amazing true story about the heart behind music's greatest legends.